I never thought something like this would happen, a moment that would completely shift how I view my family, my brother, and myself. We all have moments in life that define us, moments where everything changes, sometimes in a second. But nothing prepared me for what my little brother did. At first, it seemed like something simple, something that wouldn't even matter. But the truth, it was anything but that. The kind of thing that stays with you, that twists in your gut every time you think about it. Imagine the person you trust most in this world. Someone you've grown up with, laughed with, cried with, shared your deepest secrets with, turning everything upside down in the most unexpected way. What happened that day was so shocking, so out of the blue, that it left me questioning everything about our relationship, everything I thought I knew about loyalty, family, and trust. What my brother did wasn't just a mistake, and it wasn't something that could just be brushed aside. It was a turning point, one that left me speechless, and it's something I still can't shake off. Stay with me as I walk you through this. I promise, what I'm about to share isn't easy, but it's real, and it will make you think twice about the people you trust, and the things you never thought could happen. You won't believe what my little brother did, but before I get into it, there's something about me that I've never really shared. Something I never thought I'd have to face. Something that, at the time, seemed too personal to talk about. This story, this journey I'm going to take you on, it's as much about me as it is about him. Because sometimes, when you're forced to confront a betrayal or an unexpected truth, you realize there's more to the story than just the other person's actions. You start questioning yourself, your own choices, and the path you've taken up until that point. So before I tell you what my brother did, I need you to understand something. This isn't just a family drama. This is about trust, vulnerability, and how everything can change in a heartbeat. Let's go back to the beginning, before the tension started to build, and when everything still seemed normal. I've spent my whole life looking after my little brother. From the moment he was born, he was this cute, innocent kid who could do no wrong. Everyone loved him. He was the kid everyone wanted to be around. And me, I was the older sister, the one who was always there to protect him, to make sure he was okay. We were the perfect pair. Him, the charming, sweet little guy who was the heart of the family, and me, the older sister who made sure everything stayed in order. We grew up close, closer than most siblings. We spent summers together, holidays together, and most of our childhood memories were tied to each other. I watched him grow up, and I took pride in being there for him, every step of the way. I was the one who comforted him when he was scared, the one who fought his battles, and the one who made sure he knew right from wrong. He was my baby brother. I always thought that would never change. It was never even a question in my mind. I was his protector, and he was my little brother, the one I'd always look out for. He had this innocence to him, and I honestly thought he'd always stay that way. We had this bond, this unspoken understanding, that nothing would come between us. We were inseparable, but then one summer, everything changed. Let me take you back to that summer. It was supposed to be just like any other. A time for fun, a time for memories. We were in that phase where we could still be carefree. We spent late nights watching movies, playing games, talking about our futures. Things that made me feel like everything was perfect. Our relationship felt invincible, like nothing could ever break it. But then one night something small happened. Something I didn't think much of at the time. But looking back, it was the beginning of the end. We had a few friends over, just hanging out, having some drinks, laughing about silly things. And in that moment, it felt like nothing could touch us. But I didn't realize how quickly that night would turn into something I couldn't control. My brother, the one who always seemed so innocent, so pure, he wasn't that same person anymore. Not in that moment. We'd always been close, sure, but I never expected things to shift like this. It wasn't that he changed overnight. It was more subtle. It was like the kid I knew, the brother I looked after, was starting to show signs of something else, something I didn't understand. I had always been the protector, but this time, I wasn't sure if I was the one who needed protecting. He was growing up, too fast, in ways I wasn't prepared for. The jokes, the looks, the little things that seemed harmless at first, but over time, they started to change how I saw him. You know, when you've been around someone for so long, you start to see the smallest things that maybe no one else notices. I started to feel it, that shift in the air between us. It wasn't obvious at first, but there were moments when his attention to me, his gestures felt off. It felt like I was walking a thin line, and I didn't know where it would lead. But what happened that summer, I could never have anticipated. What started as a playful moment, a harmless joke, turned into something that would leave me questioning everything. One night, after everyone had left, it happened. We were sitting around, just the two of us, talking like we always did. The conversation seemed normal, but there was something different in the way he spoke to me. I could feel the tension building, but I wasn't sure why. I didn't know how to react, how to explain the feeling in my gut. Was it just me overthinking? Was I reading too much into it? Then he made a comment. A simple comment that, at the time, I didn't fully understand. But in hindsight, it was the start of everything. It was a joke, but it wasn't. He looked at me and said something that caught me completely off guard. At first, I laughed it off, thinking he was just being playful. But there was something about the way he said it that didn't sit right with me. It wasn't the words themselves, but the tone, the way his eyes lingered just a second too long. It was like a switch flipped, and suddenly everything changed. I didn't know how to process it, but I felt that shift in our relationship, and I couldn't shake it. I told myself it was just a joke, that maybe I was overthinking it, but I knew in that moment that things between us had shifted. Something had changed, and that moment, that conversation, would end up setting everything else in motion. I couldn't let it go. I tried to brush it off, but it was like a crack in the foundation of something I thought was unbreakable. Every time I looked at him after that, it was different. What started as something small, a joke, turned into something bigger, something I wasn't prepared to face. The next few days were filled with awkward silences and strange conversations that left me feeling more unsettled than ever before. And then the real shift happened. What had once been a bond one could count on, a bond one could trust, was now hanging by a thread. You see, what happened next wasn't just a misunderstanding. It wasn't just a silly comment. It was something that I couldn't ignore anymore. And the consequences, they would be far-reaching, in ways I couldn't have imagined back then. But let's not jump ahead. Let me take you through the rest of this. How everything unfolded, and how I was forced to face the hardest truth I've ever had to deal with. Stay with me. It all started when we went on that trip together, just the two of us. It wasn't supposed to be anything extraordinary, just a weekend getaway to reconnect, spend some time away from the rest of the family, and share some memories. We'd always been close, so a trip like this seemed like the perfect idea. I thought it was going to be one of those moments where we laugh, catch up, and remind ourselves why we're family. But what I didn't expect was how close we would get, in ways I never saw coming. You'd think spending time with someone you grew up with would be comfortable, natural. But I started to notice something in the air, something that hadn't been there before. At first, it was small, tiny details that didn't seem like much. A lingering glance here, a smile there. It was nothing I thought to read too deeply into. But as the trip went on, I began to feel like I was missing something. A shift I couldn't quite place, but I could feel it. I just couldn't figure out what it was. At first, it felt innocent. Maybe too innocent. We were walking along the beach one evening, the waves crashing softly against the shore. I could see the carefree energy in him. He was laughing, joking around, the same little brother I'd always known. But underneath that laughter, I felt something, a discomfort. It was like the way he was looking at me. The way he would laugh a little too hard at things I said or did, felt different. I tried to brush it off. I thought, Maybe I'm just overthinking things. Maybe it's just the atmosphere, the freedom of being away from everything that's making us act a little off. But every time we were alone, it felt like there was something between us, something unspoken, hanging in the air. It wasn't obvious. It was subtle, but I could feel it. There was an awkwardness in the space when no one else was around, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, I couldn't. Then came that night, the night everything changed. We were sitting on the balcony of our cabin. The night was deep, and the quiet was only broken by the distant sound of the ocean. A few drinks were passed around, light-hearted conversations. Nothing too serious, just two siblings enjoying the evening. But as the night wore on, something shifted again. We had both had a bit more to drink than usual. The conversation began to drift, and I remember him asking me a question that at the time seemed completely out of nowhere. It was almost a joke, but not quite. He said something about how different we were from each other, how I was so serious all the time, and how he could never understand why I kept so much to myself. I didn't think much of it at first, brushing it off like I always had with his playful comments. But then, after a long pause, he said something that stopped me dead in my tracks. It was something about being closer, and I didn't quite understand the context. He laughed, trying to pass it off, but his eyes lingered on me in a way that felt strange. I remember laughing it off too, thinking it was just the alcohol talking. But the more we talked, the more things got confusing. He started to talk about how people don't always know how to connect, and how sometimes people need to push boundaries to really understand each other. At that moment, it didn't make sense. I thought maybe it was just some deep philosophical rambling, but the way he looked at me, the way his words kept trailing off in a way that was too intimate for a sibling, something wasn't right. I tried to laugh it off, I really did. I tried to distance myself from it, tried to pretend like nothing was changing, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I was in too deep. I had to ask myself, is he serious? And if he was, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for us? It was the night everything changed. The night I finally realized that what I thought was a safe, familiar bond was shattered. My brother had always been the person I trusted above all others, someone I'd confided in for years. But that night, everything about our relationship, about him, shifted in a way I couldn't come back from. We were alone, just the two of us, hanging out like we always did. It was supposed to be another one of those simple, carefree nights, but I could feel the shift in the air. Even before he said anything, I didn't know exactly what was happening, but I could sense that something was off. There was tension, a weight in the room that neither of us spoke about, but both of us felt. And then it happened. He said something that hit me like a slap in the face, something that felt so wrong, so out of place, that I froze for a moment, unable to process it. It wasn't just the words he used. It was the way he looked at me when he said them. I'll never forget the look in his eyes, cold and distant, like I wasn't even the person he had known for years. The weight of his gaze lingered, heavy and unsettling, and in that instant I knew something was broken, something I could never fix. I was left standing there numb. I don't even think I could speak for a few moments. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I felt betrayed, confused, and most of all lost. How could he have crossed that line? How could the person I trusted with everything, who I thought I understood so well, do something like that? I kept replaying the words over and over in my head, trying to find some way to rationalize it, some way to convince myself that I misunderstood. But deep down I knew the truth. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything we'd built between us was a lie. I couldn't stop thinking about how the trust we shared seemed to vanish in an instant. It wasn't just about the words. It wasn't even about what he said. It was about how I felt. I felt like I didn't know him anymore. Like everything I thought I knew about him, about us, had been completely wrong. And then the flood of emotions hit. I felt like I was falling apart from the inside out. I wanted to scream, to demand answers. But all I could do was sit there, paralyzed by the shock of it all. The person who had always been my protector, my confidant, now felt like a stranger. I didn't know what to believe anymore. Was everything between us real? Was the love and loyalty I thought we had just an illusion? I couldn't understand how someone who had been so close to me, someone I thought was family, my flesh and blood, could betray me like this. It was a loss that cut deeper than anything I could have imagined. And I couldn't escape the feeling that I'd lost more than just trust. I'd lost a part of myself that I thought I'd never have to question. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't look at him the same way. Every glance, every word felt like a lie. It was like something inside of me had broken, and I couldn't put the pieces back together. I couldn't even bring myself to talk to him, let alone pretend like everything was fine. There was a heaviness in the air, a tension that neither of us could deny. Every conversation we had after that moment felt loaded, as though there was a constant unspoken question hanging in the room. Do you still trust me? And the truth was, I didn't know. I didn't know how to look at him and pretend like everything was okay when deep down, I was torn apart by what had just happened. The hardest part was seeing him still act like everything was normal, like nothing had changed, like everything was still the same. But I couldn't ignore the weight of what had happened. I couldn't just pretend like it hadn't completely shifted everything I thought I knew about him. Every time I saw him, it felt like I was looking at a stranger, someone who had replaced the person I once trusted with my whole heart. It was like I was caught in a haze of confusion and hurt, trapped between the person I knew him to be and the one he'd shown me that night. And what hurt the most wasn't just the betrayal. It was the loss of my own sense of certainty, of security. Everything I thought I understood about love, trust, and family was now in question. I remember sitting in silence, wondering if things would ever go back to the way they were. But deep down, I knew they never would. And somehow, that truth was more painful than anything else. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The tension, the silence between us, it had reached a point where I couldn't just let it slide. After everything that had happened, there was no way to keep pretending everything was fine. I needed answers, and I needed them from him. I had to sit down with him. The question that had been eating at me for days, for weeks, finally slipped out. What's going on? I asked him, my voice shaking but trying to keep it steady. And let me tell you, his response was nothing like I expected. You would think that after everything, there'd be some kind of remorse, that he'd apologize, maybe even try to explain himself. But instead, he shrugged. It was as if what had happened didn't matter, or worse, he didn't even realize what had been at stake. It was like nothing had changed for him. I couldn't believe my own ears. It felt like the last bit of trust one had in him evaporated right there in front of me. His words, empty. His tone, dismissive. I didn't know if I should be angry or just defeated, but I had to hold my ground. I had to make him see that this wasn't something that could just be brushed away. As I sat there listening to him, I realized something. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about me too. Everything that had happened, it wasn't just his fault. Yes, he had crossed a line, but I had allowed it to go as far as it did. I had ignored the warning signs, convinced myself that it was just a phase or that it would get better. I was too afraid to confront him, too afraid of what it might do to our relationship. In that moment, I understood that I had let things get so complicated, not because of him alone, but because I hadn't stood up for myself sooner. I let the boundaries blur, let my fear of confronting the truth keep me silent. And the worst part, I had allowed myself to become numb to it, thinking it wasn't a big deal. But it was. It was a huge deal. I had to own that part of the equation too. After everything, after the fights and the awkward silences and the emotional roller coaster, one thing became painfully clear. Relationships, especially family ones, can be fragile. You can think you're untouchable, that nothing could ever break the bond you share with the people closest to you. But I learned that what I thought was unbreakable was not. What happened between my brother and me didn't just shake me. It shook my entire perception of family, of trust, and of my own ability to set boundaries. I realized that we can't take our relationships for granted. We can't assume that just because we've been close for years, nothing will ever change. I didn't expect things to ever get back to normal. Honestly, I'm not sure they ever will. But I've learned that sometimes we have to let go of the idea of perfection, the idea that everything has to stay the same. Sometimes, healing comes from the hardest of truths and the hardest decisions. And while it may hurt, we have to trust that we'll come out stronger, no matter how broken things may seem at first. Family is everything, until it's not. But that's a lesson I had to learn the hard way. I still remember the exact moment when everything shifted. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, at least not in the way you might think. It was subtle, almost like a shadow crossing the line between trust and betrayal. The kind of thing that, if you're not paying attention, can slip by unnoticed. But that was the moment. The moment I realized things would never be the same again. We had always been close, my brother and I. It wasn't just the casual sibling bond you see in most families. It was deep. We had been through so much together. Childhood spent under the same roof, late night talks, shared laughs, and even trusted him. But sometimes trust can be misplaced. Sometimes, the person you trust the most is the one who will make you question everything. The thing is, I never saw it coming. He had always been so sweet, so innocent in my eyes. I thought that no matter what happened in life, no matter how much time passed, our bond was untouchable. But that moment, that one conversation changed everything. I couldn't believe what he said. It didn't even make sense. It was like hearing words from a stranger, not the person I thought I knew better than anyone else in the world. So there I was staring at him, feeling every ounce of my belief in our relationship crumble with each word. I wanted to scream, to cry, to ask him how he could say something like that. But I didn't. I stayed quiet, because in that silence, I was trying to figure out what to do with what I had just heard. What could I even say? How could I process something so out of character for him? Something so different from everything I thought we shared. I thought about it for days, nights spent wide awake, trying to make sense of it. I couldn't tell anyone. No one would believe me. How could I explain that my little brother, the one I'd raised almost like my own child, had crossed a line that I never imagined could be crossed? And yet, as much as I want to make sense of it now, the truth is, this story is far from over. The questions I have, the things I still don't understand, they're still with me. I'm still processing everything, still figuring out where we stand, and where this goes from here. Will we ever repair what was broken between us? Can we even rebuild after everything that happened? Who knows? Maybe one day, I'll share what happened after this moment. Maybe I'll tell you about the long, painful conversations we had, or the ones we never had. Maybe I'll explain how we tried to fix what seemed like an irreparable rift. Or maybe I'll tell you that we didn't fix it at all. Either way, I think the story still has a lot to unfold, and I'm not ready to let go of what happened just yet. So, what do you think? Can families really recover from something like this? Is there a way to move forward when trust has been shattered, especially with someone so close to you? I want to know your thoughts, your personal experiences. How do you deal with something that turns your world upside down? Let me know in the comments below. I want to hear from you, because I know I'm not the only one who's gone through something like this. If you found this video eye-opening, if it resonated with you in any way, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You know, these types of personal stories are hard to tell, but it helps me know that you're out there listening, and that maybe, just maybe, you've gone through something similar and can relate. So if you want to hear more about what happened in my journey, more about the truth behind this story, and how things unfold from here, make sure to stay tuned. And if you're going through something like this, feeling lost or betrayed by someone you love, please reach out. You're not alone in this. And I'm here if you need to talk. Don't forget to hit that notification bell too, so you don't miss the next part of this story. And maybe, just maybe, some answers.